Welcome to the Herstory Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Herstory TV and the Herstory podcast. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am blessed with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maria C. Palmer, and I'm based right outside of New York City in America in a town called Ringwood, New Jersey. And I'm 42 years old, and I am co-author of the book On the Rocks, The Pre-Madonna Story, which is the story of the rise and fall of my father, infamous restaurateur Joseph Costanza Jr. Right now, the book is placing as the bestseller in the Culinary memoir ebook category, ahead of Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential and Stanley Tucci's Taste. And I want to tell you my story because it was not always a happy story. So I grew up in an Italian restaurant in a little suburb called McKees Rocks outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And you may have heard of McKees Rocks because just this past fall, the football Buffalo Bills star Damar Hamlin collapsed on the field. And he is actually from McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. And his mother's daycare center that he's raised now over $9 million for shares an alleyway with the building that was my father's former restaurant, the Pre-Madonna. And I grew up in this restaurant family. Whenever I was 4 years old, my dad bought a failing business, hoping to turn it into a world-class restaurant. But what he didn't realize is that McKees Rocks is really only a destination for locals. And he had really a challenging time getting that business off the ground. But after about 3 years of blood, sweat, and tears, he was able to get a review from Mike Kalina, which was the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette food critic, who really changed the course of his life. And the restaurant went from doing 5 dinners a night to an 83-seat restaurant doing 200 to 300 dinners a night, having a 2 to 3 hour wait for dinner. And we had likeness of celebrities, sports stars, broadcasters, pretty much you name it. If they were somebody in Pittsburgh or if they were somebody who was traveling to Pittsburgh, they came and dined at our restaurant. The restaurant won all kinds of national and international awards, including the Dorona Award, which was equivalent at that time to the James Beard Award. And James Beard at that time was only servicing chefs. Now I know it services more than just chefs. And everything was going great, and our family was really at the top of our game. And then one day, there was a knock on my door, and I was only 20 years old, a junior in college, and I was between jobs, and the federal government came, and they were looking for my father. And I didn't think of anything of it, nor did my father. In the time that he was in business, about 1 million people walked through his doors. So there were people of all sorts. And, sometimes people had questions about other people. So whenever the federal government came to my door, my immediate thought was that they were there for somebody else. But what I found out after I sent them to my father's restaurant is that they were actually there because my father's name was mentioned in a federal grand jury investigation as to somebody of interest. And when your name is mentioned in a federal grand jury investigation, the investigation is not a civil case. It's automatically a criminal case. So after all of these accolades and blood, sweat, and tears and just pouring our work into the community, all of a sudden we were subject of a federal investigation that lasted 3 years. And eventually my father pled guilty to tax evasion charges and served a stint in federal prison. And that moment was really the turning point of my life because, as I said, we were at the top of the world. And then all of a sudden, our world got flipped upside down. And I had to make a choice. I had to figure out how to, number one, make sense of all of this. And number two, where to go from. And I decided after the investigation, I was actually out of college and I decided to join my boyfriend, now husband, in Los Angeles and try to move 3,000 miles away to get away from my problems. But Gertrude, as I'm sure that you know, whenever you run away from your problems, they have a way of jumping in your carry-on luggage and coming with you. And so whenever I went to Los Angeles and I went to just try to get away from everything, and everything followed me, and I was having extreme anxiety, depression, panic attacks. I really was barely able to function because I was just so torn up about what had gone on with my family. And it really took me meeting this crazy nun. I was a former Catholic myself, and I went one day to go and see a presentation of this woman's sister, Suzanne Jabro, who was bringing children to visit their incarcerated mothers at the time in this program called Get on the Bus. And she told her story and how she started this organization, bringing children to go see their parents in prison. And I was so moved by what it was that she was doing because with me, we had the means to go and visit my father. I was an adult whenever everything happened to my father, but I couldn't fathom having young children not being able to see their parents. And after her presentation, I went up to her and I said, I just want to introduce myself. I want to tell you a little bit about me and about my story. And if I could ever be of service to you, I would like to be of service to you. And it was really from then on that we formed a bond. We exchanged information. She ended up losing my number over the course of time. But, a year later, we got back in touch and I started working for the organization, first just volunteering and speaking. And then I ended up running the organization, a statewide organization that now was taking not only children to see their mothers, but also children to see their fathers all around the state of California. And what I found, Gertrude, is that I thought I was taking this job because I thought I was going to be helping families. But in fact, they helped me. They helped me to heal. They helped me to find what it meant to have unconditional love, to be a family member, to be part of something greater. I know that you're really big in Ubuntu, and it really kind of brought that whole message back to me and really gave me some enlightenment. And it was through then that I kind of started to heal. And I decided once my father got out of prison, he was really having a challenging time himself because the best years of his life were had at the Pre-Madonna restaurant. And as I had said before, celebrities like Danny Aiello, Tommy Lasorda, Jamie Lee Curtis, Pat Sajak, Harry Carey, all kinds of people. He even did a to go for Frank Sinatra. All kinds of people came in and out of his restaurant. And also his restaurant was a place of joy for him. He was able to be part of really amazing moments in people's lives and also able to comfort people through food and hospitality whenever they were going through the hard times. And stripping that business away from him, he really had a hard time finding purpose in his own life. And so I started writing On the Rocks some 17 years ago. And I started this as a family history project. And I would say things like, hey dad, tell me about a time that a celebrity came in and, what happened, or tell me about a crazy time where something very unexpected happened, or tell me what your favorite special was and why, or, tell me about a time that you wish you could redo something. And we collected these little vignettes and stories, and that became really the backbone of the book. And then I was just so pleased and glad I was in touch with my old high school English teacher, who, whenever I had her in high school, her name was Ruthie Dines, but now it's Ruthie Robbins, and she's the co-writer of On the Rocks. And she had recently gotten divorced, and she'd moved to Buffalo, New York, and she was editing books for published authors. And she had known that I was working on this project because I was friends with her son, and he was also living in Los Angeles at the time that I was. And so on a visit, she had asked to see some of the vignettes that I had put together, and she ended up bringing them to her writing group, and they agreed on two things. And the first thing is that they said that, the story itself had a ton of potential. But the second thing is it also needed a lot of work. And so at that point, Ruthie and I became partners, and we worked very closely during the pandemic time, really polishing and shining the story, and figuring out, number one, it was partially in my voice and in his voice. And we decided that there was one voice that was shouting through, and that was that of my father's, Joseph Costanza Jr. So what makes our story unique is that we are two females. I'm 42 years old, and my co-author today is 70 years old, and we write as a male. And that is one of the things that we have been receiving a lot of critical acclaim for, because people can't tell that we're not a male in our writing. And it was just such a fun project. And I know that you're all about female empowerment and female projects, and really being able to partner with my former high school English teacher, and such a wonderful human being, and a female that I've looked up to for my entire life. It's really meant the world to me to be able to be there with her and to experience these moments as a writer. And we've really not had a bad moment on this project, and I think that that's one of the reasons why it's just so wonderful to reap all of the benefits now, because the struggle was great. And whenever you work on anything for 17 years, and I tell people from the start, On the Rocks was not an instant success whatsoever. Whenever I took it to query it to agents, I actually queried 265 agents. And whenever you query an agent, you're sending, in the narrative nonfiction category, you're sending your full manuscript, which ours was about 90,000 words, a full book proposal, which is like your business plan for your book. Ours was 60 pages, including about 30 pages of writing samples, and also a one sheet on you, why you should be the author and how you're going to get the book into the hands of the people that will be buying your book. And at that, I sent this out to 265 agents. 140 of them just flat out said, thanks, but no thanks. About 108 ghosted us and never said anything, which I found kind of amazing. And 17 people agreed that they wanted to see more, but only one person decided to offer us representation. And whenever we went into the submission process, where the agent tries to then sell your book to potential publishers, it was much of the same. For the first 3 months, it was kind of exciting. We got some close passes, but everybody said no. And whenever we started reaching the 6-month mark, and certainly the 9 and the 12-month mark, essentially this project felt dead on submission. And for me, that was heartbreaking, because this was my father's life work that I wanted to see through. And I know that I had mentioned before, while we were going through this process, he had a lot of health challenges. So he had open heart surgery, major back surgery, a kidney transplant that failed, and then another kidney transplant that worked, but he was allergic to the medication, and it actually put him in an induced coma for an entire week in intensive care. And so going through this process and not knowing if A, I was ever going to make this happen, and B, if I was going to make it happen in time. Looking back on it now, it just means so much to me that I was able to check off all of those boxes. And I'm so grateful now, looking back on all of the struggles that we certainly had. And we had very many, because now it makes the success of them certainly a little sweeter. So I'm just very grateful to be part of the Herstory circle. And I think what you are doing is just such a wonderful thing, Gertrude. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Maria, your story is inspiring, and I can feel it has been a labor of love to get you to this point, and you and your family have gone through so much.
Yeah, it certainly has been. I always, say, people ask me, why did you not give up? 17 years, so many no's. And for me, if it would have just been my story, I do think that I may have given up. But because it was my family's story, my father's story, and his dream, I couldn't bear to throw in the towel. I was able to just kind of ride the ship, even if the ship was going to sink. I was just that determined.
Oh man, I love it. And the incredible thing is you took the focus off yourself and started giving. The nuns organization that you got involved in, you know how life sometimes will put just the right person in your path at just the right time.
Absolutely.
What was it about giving that you feel helped you and changed your perspective on everything that was happening at that time?
Sure. So, just to give you a perspective, Gertrude, during that time, really was not functional. I had a hard time laughing. I had a hard time crying. I just couldn't even deal with basic emotions. Like, I grew up in a restaurant, and I love food. And I remember just going out to eat with my then boyfriend, now husband. And if there were too many specials, I was just overwhelmed, and I would just kind of run out the door because it was just too much for me. And whenever I got connected with Sister Suzanne Jabro and I started to give back, it became larger than me. It wasn't just, this is what's going on with me. Woe is me. I feel so bad for myself. And, I gonna like curl up on the couch and cry. It was, I have a job to do. I have to bring children to go see their parents. And if I don't do that, they're not going to get a chance to visit with their parents. So with me, I became on a mission, and it just became so much greater than just my story and my issues. And that's what really made me pull through and pull forward.
Wow. Now, before we started this interview, I was sharing with you the reason behind her story, how I personally collapsed with heart failure. It sounds to me like your dad had gone through such a traumatic experience. It ended up compounding and impacting on his health issues. Is that correct?
Sure. So, I think that whenever he was in the restaurant business, he also loves to eat. And
Mhm.
so he got diabetes, type 2 diabetes at a young age. I think he was only 31 or 32 whenever he was diagnosed. and his health problems have really exasperated, and I'm sure it's because of stress. Not only just the stress of having the restaurant whenever he did, but certainly the stress of he, ran for political office. And in my opinion, that was the beginning of the end for him, because he got into some financial troubles, and then, things kind of spiraled downward with the government. And, I think that all of these things, compound, and they definitely have an impact on our physical health whenever we are dealing with loads of stress and, tough emotional times. It's got to go somewhere. So
Yeah.
if you're not, dealing with it up here and in your heart and soul and kind of resolving your issues, it's going to show up in your kidneys. It's going to show up in, like yours did, in your heart. It's going to show up in other places. And, we have to work through these issues whenever they come up, or else they sort of take over us. And that's certainly what happened with him, for
Oh,
sure.
man. Now, your persistence in getting this book out, it's just amazing. A lot of people would have given up.
Sure.
What was it? What was it that made you keep your eye on the goal and say, despite all of these rejections, despite all the no's, I'm just going to keep going? What was that?
Well, a couple of things. So first of all, it is my personal family story, and without family, you have nothing, right? So I knew that this was a dream and a goal of my father to one day have his story told to the masses. And also, of course, I'm not completely objective because I am his daughter, but I am a writer by trade. I'm a grant writer for a not-for-profit organization called St. Paul's Community Development Corporation. And I know that one of the ways in which you garner support is through telling stories through images and through people. And I can very easily recognize what makes the elements of a good story. And so whenever my father was telling me his stories of the restaurant, and he was saying things like, "Hey, did I ever tell you about the time whenever Johnny from the neighborhood came in after hours with a stripper, and then they got into a fight and he left her there. She passed out in the bathroom without her pants, and I had to sneak her out without her knowing where she lived and get her home without the cops knowing." And it's like, no, do tell. Or
Oh,
did I ever
my
tell you about
gosh.
the time that Danny Aiello and I sat down and shared a piece of veal parmesan, and he talked about his days as a bus driver in New York City? No, do tell. So it was all of these really 1-2 punch kind of stories that I couldn't let go. So that was the first thing, is I knew that this was a good story. The other thing is I know that everybody's got a place of comfort. Food is such a big thing, no matter what culture you come from. I know that
Yes.
you talked about, being from Zimbabwe. I know that food is such a big thing in the African culture, certainly a huge thing in the Italian culture. Americans, obviously they love their food. Really, no matter what culture you're from, you have, food as part of that culture, and food is comfort, and food is love. And so for me, whenever people would say things like, your story is just a regional story, nobody's going to care about it, and I said, well, what about Saturday Night Live fever? What about Cheers? What about
Yes.
all of these little spaces? No matter where you are, you have a restaurant, you have a bar, you have some place that you go to whenever you want to celebrate something. You have some place that you want to go to whenever you want to just be comforted. If you've had a bad day, or you lost your job, or you got divorced, or, a family member has passed on, you go to a place for comfort. And for us, Pre-Madonna was that space. But I said to everybody, it doesn't have to be Pre-Madonna. Put in whatever it is that your favorite space is, and that's what this story is about. And that's
Mm.
where this story takes us. And so I knew that there was just too many commercial elements to this. And then also too, I knew that I had such a personal vested interest that, I was going to make this happen, no matter what. And, certainly I took a lot of constructive criticism and feedback, and I made my story better, but I did
Mhm.
everything that I could to just get it out there into the world. And now it just is so much sweeter, knowing that I went through those struggles. Sometimes the greatest struggles in life become the greatest joys, right? And that's kind of what I'm feeling at this moment.
I love it. And the fact that you were able to go back to and meet with your teacher to co-author the book, how did that come to being?
Sure. So I was lucky enough to always be in touch with her. And there, you talk about serendipity. Ruthie she grew up one street away from the Pre-Madonna restaurant. So she is a total, we call McKees Rocks the Rocks, or Stowe Rocks, because it's two townships that border one another, Stowe Township and McKees Rocks. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of known by everybody as the Rocks. And she grew up as a Rocks girl. She grew up in the era where the Rocks was, in a way, kind of, a posh, I wouldn't say posh, but a very humble, nice place to be. Cobblestone streets, think independently operated stores. Definitely had a neighborhood behind it. Whenever my
Mhm.
father got into the Rocks, it was, well beyond that time. And everybody had kind of moved from that area and went to nicer suburbs. So you had all of the businesses and industries moving out. So what moved in was crime and violence, and there was no industry and no jobs. And so Ruthie was actually one of the first customers at the Pre-Madonna and believed in my father before she even knew me. And then she became my teacher in 6th grade. And then anytime I had an opportunity to have her as an elective, I chose to have her as an elective. Her one son is just a year older than me, and then her other two sons are just a couple years younger. So I was always friends with her children. And whenever I moved to Los Angeles, her oldest son also did too. And that's
Okay.
really the connection. We kept in touch, and she had even written all of my college recommendations and references. And whenever she found out through her son that I was writing this story about my father, that's really where it all got started. And she just wanted to take a look as a friend. But whenever I asked her for that help and she saw potential, that's whenever we became partners and we started to work together. And it's been wonderful ever since. Really.
How magical is that?
It's
Now,
amazing.
let me take you back a little bit to the younger you,
Yeah.
the young woman who was caught in this family storm, not coping emotionally, psychologically with everything that was going on. You mentioned that you physically moved and went to California hoping to get away from it, and you carried it
Sure.
with you there. If there is a young person, a young woman who's listening to this podcast right now, is in the middle of a storm, doesn't know how to figure it out and get it right, if you could go back and have the conversation with the younger you, based on what life has taught you, what three nuggets of wisdom would you give?
It's a great question. So I would say for anybody listening right now that's going through a challenging time, hang on and hang in there, because tough times don't last, but tough people do. And I always tell people, my clients, my children, it's not the person that's the smartest in the room that's going to be the most successful. It's the one that's the most resilient. And resiliency happens whenever we go through things that do not seem like blessings in our lives, but we hang on and we persevere. And so if you're going through something challenging, first of all, I'm holding space for you, because I know how it feels whenever everything in your life comes apart. And it is not a good feeling. And you feel ripped. Your world is completely upside down, and I get it. But you know what? One foot in front of the other. And I always say to my younger self, what got me through those times is sometimes, as silly as it may sound, scheduling out things, just even your basic needs. Okay, today I need to eat. I'm going to have, something for breakfast, lunch, and dinner at this time. And I'm going to try to sleep at this time. And, you celebrate those small successes because whenever we are in trauma, things get flipped upside down. And sometimes we're not able to have that normalized schedule or cycle that we would. So, really, whenever you're in a traumatic point, you need to be kind to yourself, take things a little slower than normal, but try every day to do something a little bit more to get back on your feet. And eventually, I know that it sounds like it's never going to happen, but it will. And you may look back on whatever struggle that you're going through, and it might in your life be also a blessing. I always say, had we not gone through all of this, first of all, there would be no book, because nobody wants to read something where everything is just, and then I won this award, and then I did this, and then I, got this honor, and then this person came and gave me a high five, and then this person said I was super cool. No, we connect to people through their humanity, and we connect to people through their struggles because we can identify with people. And so I would say, you know what, keep on fighting the fight and keep on pressing on. And one day you may look back on your life and you may say, there's a reason why this happened to me. Again, I don't want to go back there, but
Right.
what did I learn from this? And how did I grow from this? And, that's what I would say to my
Oh, I
young.
love it. I love it. So let's end our interview with me teleporting you into the future this time. So
Ooh,
let's imagine that time is an illusion. Your past, your present, your future exist in the same timeline. And I can take you to the 100-year-old you, and you're sitting on your porch surrounded by your children, your dogs, your cats, your grandchildren, whoever is with you at that time. If you could have a conversation with the future you, based on how you're living your life right now, what would you say to this wise woman who's led you to that point?
gosh, what a great question. I think that I would say, thank you. Thank you for being willing to stick through all of the things that felt almost impossible to get through, because it was worth it in the end. And all of it now seems to make sense. And, thank you for being willing to give yourself to other people and to learn and to be humble and to enjoy life in the way that you did, and to not hide. For so many years, my younger self hid behind this whole persona. I was afraid that people would find out about, people that didn't know me would find out that my father went through this really public case and that he was incarcerated. And not that I thought any less of my father, but I was just scared that people would find that out and they would think less of me. I have no more shame and I have no more guilt. And I'm hoping that 100-year-old me is going to feel that same way as they go through other challenging things in life.
Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. Maria, your story is inspiring. You have inspired every writer who's out there this morning, who's struggling to get themselves a book deal, to get themselves an agent. Your tenacity and persistence is just awesome.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for holding on to the vision and the dream. You knew the story was good. And sometimes it doesn't matter what other people think. It's what
Sure.
you think and what you believe. And you really have given us a really good example this morning.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, and thank you for having me, Gertrude. It was just really wonderful to not only to be able to share my story, but to hear your story too. And you are such an inspiring person. And, thank you for what you're doing for women and highlighting all these wonderful stories. I've really enjoyed watching your podcast over the last year. So thank you. Keep on keeping on, everybody. Don't
Thanks
give
so
up.
much, Marie. No, stopping is not an option. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Her Story Circle is a movement of women in 15 countries who are stepping up to inspire, energize, and motivate. Come back again tomorrow when I interview another amazing woman. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And Maria, good luck with the book.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Gertrude. I appreciate it.
Bye for now, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making